Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this second webinar in our series called Laying the Foundation for Research Data Services. My name is Christy Park. I'm the director of the Texas Digital Library. And as you may know, this series is part of our ongoing efforts at TDL to inform our membership about the Texas Data Repository, our newest service, and to situate it within the context of research data management more generally, and to equip our members with some tools and information for outreach to their campus communities. Today's webinar is entitled Teaching Data, Developing Data Instruction Using a Multi-Level Competency Model, and we have Peace Awesome-Williamson from UT Arlington, the Director of Research Services in UT Arlington's library, to lead us through this discussion today. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have questions as we go, you can type those into the chat window in Adobe Connect, and we'll answer them as we come to an appropriate pause in the presentation. And we also should have some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar today, where you can ask those questions as well. We are recording today's presentation and will make it available along with the slides from the webinar in the TDL DSpace repository, which is at tdl-ir.tdl.org. And we have today's slides available in the file share window in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, and you can download those now. There's also a PDF document there called Data Competencies 2.1. This is the UT Arlington set of data competencies that Peace is going to be going over today. You can download those as well. And I want to make a quick note about the slide formatting as we get started. One of the idiosyncrasies of Adobe Connect is that it converts PowerPoint files as it uploads them into the system, and sometimes fonts and formatting get a little wonky in the process. Unfortunately, some of the fonts got a little messed up in that process today, so you may see some inconsistencies in font usage, and I apologize to Peace for that problem, but everything should be legible and readable as we go forward. So in the first webinar in our series, if you attended that, Santee Thompson from the University of Houston, Peace, and I gave an overview of the series, including a discussion of the Texas Data Repository, which is our new service, and Peace introduced a set of competencies that UT Arlington has adapted as part of its data information literacy training program. You can see a link to the recording from that webinar on this slide, which is in the TDL DSpace repository. As a reminder for those new to the discussion or who missed the first webinar, the Texas Data Repository, or TDR, is a repository hosted by Texas Digital Library that's intended for sharing, archiving, and managing research data produced at Texas higher education institutions. We won't be talking much at all about the TDR specifically today, but again, you can return to that first webinar to learn more. And we also hope you'll join us for the third webinar in our series on March 9th, during which Santee and I will go into more depth about TDR's functionality and value. But today, Peace will discuss the competencies and the UT Arlington Data Information Literacy workshops in greater depth. We're really thrilled and grateful to her for being here to do that for us. And so I'm going to hand it over to her now. And we'll come back at the end of the presentation when we should have some time for questions and answers from our audience. So Peace, I'll hand it over to you.
Talk to you. Thanks, Christy. So today, as Christy mentioned, I'll be talking about the data competencies. I brought them up in the first webinar. However, I'll retouch on some of the important points to note for those who were unable to make the first webinar. And we'll talk through what the competencies are, where they came from, why they were developed, and why they were adapted, as well as examples of how they're used and taught in different classes. As Christy mentioned, feel free to ask questions as we go. I have quite a few slides, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So we were originally looking at developing data services at our university, and we were interested in seeing kind of what was going on with other libraries, how they were teaching data, and what they were doing on their campuses. So we did a lot of outreach with other data librarians or, researching, talking to them or checking out their websites and so on. And we happened upon the data information literacy, which is information about it is at that website, datainfolit.org. And when I say we, I talk about myself as well as Gretchen Jerkage, who is um, a long-term expert in information literacy teaching, instructional design, and education. And so I partnered with her as someone who has a huge depth of knowledge in that area and brought my information about data to the table so that we could partner and create something really functional. When we happened upon this, we decided that it matched a lot of what we were already developing. However, there were some differences, and so we really thought, let's implement this and let's see, if it's going to meet our needs. So the data information literacy standards were part of a grant project at Purdue, Minnesota, Oregon, and Cornell, and they're focused on developing and implementing data curriculum, which is what our goal is as well. There were some differences though. Our interest includes data ethics and a little bit more than just information literacy, but data literacy as a whole, which includes data information literacy. We also have just in touch with our own campus, we knew that research methods was something that's really important to our campus. Students are very, very familiar with research, but they're a little bit less comfortable with data. And we also have digital literacy components because digital literacy is something that I find important. It's a passion of mine to get folks comfortable with different technology and be able to quickly adapt to new programs, software, and hardware. Within data services, we consider data to be pretty much anything that you would use. This includes the traditional idea of, measurements and temperatures and calculations and numerical data, as well as other types of data like audio recordings, images, text, and pretty much anything that is a thing that you're using for your research. We primarily, I will say, in one area that we do kind of restrict, we focus more on digital data than we do collections or print items. So, data literacy is the kind of foundation of the competencies that have been adapted. And so, I just want to touch on what that means to me. And for me, it's the ability to read, create, utilize, communicate, and criticize data. And so the reason that I like this definition, this is kind of what I created based on looking at different definitions of data literacy and what I understand about data and what I want to see from those working with data on my campus. And I thought it was a lot more than being able to just understand numbers or to understand information, but to also be able to create and criticize what you find. And that gets into kind of our ethics part. So the first phase of what we did was to adapt the data information literacy competencies as they were to our campus. And so a lot of what I say will say at our campus or at UTA, and then, whatever the answer is. And so a lot of this should be able to be adapted for to you at your institution based on what your knowledge is of your campus. Or you can take it as is and then develop that knowledge over time as you begin offering workshops and other information sources for your campus. So the first 12 competencies, these were basically listed as is. Most of the information around these as they originally existed were in a book published by Purdue. However, if you visit that link down at the bottom, they have a very short blog post about the 12 competencies. And this is how they existed before. We didn't completely change them. However, we added new competencies and modified them. Things like data awareness and knowledge, data responsibility, and things like that were adjusted to be included in some way. As I mentioned in the first webinar, we added leveling. So there's emerging levels, intermediate, and expert. In addition to this, we provided learning outcomes for each. So we have what are the outcomes of workshops that are trying to accomplish this competency for folks at an emerging level. The idea of this was the original data information literacy standards were created for graduate students in STEM, which was a really specific focus. However, our focus was for a variety of disciplines and a variety of people at all levels. So everyone from a brand new first year student to someone who is an advanced researcher working on campus. We wanted to be able to have a structure for everyone. And so that's why we added these levels so that we could pull these learning outcomes and create instruction around it. So I have a couple examples of ones that we changed. These are a little bit more surface changes. So metadata was the original data information literacy competency, and you can see the subtopics below it. They're a little bit skewed, but understanding the rationality for metadata, being able to read and interpret, and so on, are all still a part of the data literacy competencies. However, we now describe it as data description. The reason for that is that many people, when they hear the word metadata, they don't fully understand it, or they think of it in a surface level like subject headings, whereas metadata is a lot more than just, subject headings. There's administrative metadata, there's descriptive metadata, and so on. And so we really wanted people to think about metadata in a more comprehensive way. And so instead of calling it metadata, we call it data description. However, it's still meaning the same thing. Similarly, with quality assurance, the original data information literacy competency, we made the adaptation to calling it data quality and documentation. There were slight changes in what we have as far as the learning outcome, in that we want more than just the idea of quality assurance, but also the idea of focus on documentation in the first place. So documenting sufficiently, and then being able to develop, the fact that you're maintaining good quality over time. And then another example of one that we actually got rid of is cultures of practice. Now, cultures of practice is something that we did not get rid of because we didn't think it was important. We got rid of it because we felt that it needed to be integrated with all the other competencies. So here are a few examples of how we did that. So here are 3 of the other competencies and a learning objective within them that relates to cultures of practice. We felt that you couldn't really have a great understanding of one of the competencies, or you can't really accomplish the competency without having this understanding of cultures of practice. They can't exist separately. And so for us, the ability to understand how to structure and clean data within your discipline is a lot different than how it would be if you move to another discipline, or if you work with a researcher from another discipline. You would then need to learn how to those common practices for that discipline. And same thing for data visualization, data storage, and formatting, and so on. And so each of those new competencies include cultures of practice as a component. Now I want to give a couple examples as well of the leveling. So I'll start with ethics. Ethics is a newly adapted competency. It existed previously before. However, now it exists with these levels. So there are the 3 levels, and then there are the learning objectives listed below them. Now, for the sake of my PowerPoint, intermediate contains emerging learning objectives, and expert contains intermediate, and so on. And then I've shown just what has been added or what has changed. So For example, for emerging, they're developing understanding about attribution and reuse, but they may not be experts yet at all of the issues around attribution and reuse to be able to say, argue around it or criticize methods of doing it and so on. So with the different leveling, we use different language. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, we use that to kind of structure how we level out these learning objectives. Also, these are developed, as I mentioned, for UTA. So we noticed that I was doing a lot of learning about data teaching and about data services from other librarians, and their campuses were just completely different. And I'm talking kind of about the New England region, right, where people are working with big data, and there's a lot of understanding around data on their campus, and we just did not see a reflection of that on our campus. And so you'll see if you pay attention to kind of the verbs and the language that we use, a lot of these are about understanding and developing understanding rather than having those high level Bloom's taxonomy terms. And that is because this is a reflection of our campus. You may want to adapt this slightly based on what you learn about your campus and say, our emerging is a little bit higher level, or it's a little bit, we're still learning too, or just kind of getting used to what are the needs of your campus and what are the expectations for somebody who is a first year student or a faculty member at your campus that might be different than that of another institution. So for the intermediate, we have, practices citing data, whereas in the expert level, they're making their own data citable. So you can kind of see that leveling there. And as I mentioned, these are all adjustable. You're free to access the PDF that has all the competencies listed, and feel free to adjust these learning objectives as you need. But we felt that it felt a lot easier to start with kind of a beginning point rather than creating these all on our own from scratch. So here's a second example of data description. For us, we started with that emerging level, once again, where they're just learning how to understand the rationale behind the use of metadata, and then as they move up the levels, they're able to then customize descriptive, structural, and administrative metadata to analyze sources, metadata sources, and basically complete more complex work as they're working with metadata. And as I go on, please note that I will talk about how we use these and how they're integrated into classes and workshops and things. And then we've got data sharing and preservation. So once again, some of these are similar through the levels, as I mentioned. Those that are similar are only mentioned at the level below, and you would just assume adoption up through intermediate and then expert. Some of them are slightly different. So you see here in blue that for data sharing and preservation, people are learning the benefits of data preservation, but once they are, getting more involved in research, or maybe they're doing research on their own, they need to recognize the benefits and costs. So maybe they need to know how much it costs to preserve data long term, or how much it costs to store data, especially big data, for their research practice. This can be for the research that they're doing on their own. This could be for draft budgets for funding proposals. All of those are kind of what's involved in what we were thinking as we created these competencies. Also for the expert level, so on the previous slide I had emerging and intermediate, and then on the expert level, then they're able to discuss the costs and complexity of data curation. That way now they're making much more informed decisions, especially someone who is creating maybe a very large database or data set that they would eventually want to share and have as a work product, or as something that's major throughout their career of something that they're creating. We have a couple of researchers who are interested in doing that at our campus, and we're engaged in these conversations with them. So after a lot of the adaptations, we ultimately ended with these 12 as of now. I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do going forward, but I've been working with these competencies as they currently exist in a number of methods of instruction, including classes and workshops and so on. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I have bolded three that we'll talk about in more detail. And these are three chosen that I wanted to talk to you about it because they're just ones that we use really often and they have been very popular on our campus. Now, I've heard at other campuses, for example, number 5 is about data management. You say the word data management, nobody shows and nobody's interested. However, at my campus, there's a lot of interest in data management. So you may find a difference in what is interesting to attendees at your campus, and you may have to work with wording. Like I've seen, okay, don't call it data management, call it data science, and then be really descriptive in the scope note about what the workshop is about, and then people will come. That is not a problem for me. I can call it data management and get attendees. So that is definitely something you want to kind of tease out over time, what words catch people's eye at your university or your institution. All right, so once we were able to adapt them, now we are working on their implementation. We're about 2 semesters in of implementing these competencies in workshops and classes. I wanted to give a few examples of classes, as I mentioned, and I was asked this question last time about, do these competencies work for outside of, the sciences? And I can say absolutely, and I'll give you some examples of, um, you can see here, different disciplines which we've provided data instruction. So as I mentioned, I wanted to touch on those 3 competencies because those are very popular at my campus. So the first was data organization and management, and it's all about managing your data through the data lifecycle. If you're unfamiliar with it, I have a kind of simplified version of an image of it on the right, and it's about working with your data from collection all the way to destruction, and that includes how you're going to preserve it long term, as well as how you work with it through this life cycle. Now, I made a mistake on this slide and I actually had an animation which no longer appears in Adobe, so I'll just talk through it a little bit. But part of the reason why I wanted to kind of splash this with actual slides that I do during workshops. So I usually start a data management workshop with why should you care? And this is a slide that I use that shows 1,500 researchers were interviewed by Nature. And as you can see, 52% felt that there was a significant crisis, while 38% that there is a slight crisis in reproducibility. And that is the area of being able to reproduce a colleagues or a peers' research. Somebody has a finding that SSRNs are effective, you should be able to reproduce that finding. And that shows its generalizability and its verifiability. However, scientists are currently unable to do that, and I bring up SSRNs because there's a lot of question on their effectiveness now because of the reproducibility crisis. So that's something that's important. However, the animation on this is another image of how many scientists are actually taking data management steps to prevent continued reproducibility crisis issues. And about half of them said that they do, but maybe, they were all kind of wishy-washy. And so it shows that although we think this is a problem, there's not much people are doing about it. And a lot of times it's because they just don't have education around it. Now we talked about data organization and management. Ethics, as I mentioned, is another popular competency that we often teach on. I have an example here of a subject that I bring up in class. However, it changes all the time because unfortunately there's tons and tons of examples of terrible ethics in working with data. Here's an example of researchers who published OkCupid data online, which included things like people's age, photos, gender, sexual orientation, bios, and so on. And some things were not included, but they were easily investigated by like somebody's username and birthday or information like that. And so all of that information was posted in an easily searchable website online. And the researchers did not see any problem with that. They were thinking kind of scientifically in that this was already public data, so it wouldn't change anything to adapt that data in any way. And so we talk a lot with students and faculty and pretty much anyone who will listen about confidentiality and privacy in a way that has progressed much further than like our IRB and other institutions like that. We talk about questions to ask yourself when engaging in research, especially with open data, and how it would affect, if we're talking about human subjects research, how it would affect those subjects or how it would affect pretty much anyone involved with the data that you're talking about. And this is because um, technology moves faster than our laws. So we have rules, HIPAA, we have FERPA, we have our IRB. However, there's so much more that we can do with technology that really just is not accounted for within the currently existing laws and standards that we must follow as researchers. So on top of following those standards, we really have to hold ourselves accountable in being ethical in our behavior. That example that I gave about those researchers using OkCupid data, they actually don't have to go through IRB at all. If you look at their research protocol, it is one that would not be required to go through IRB, which made sense a long time ago. However, now things have changed. It's a lot more easy to figure out who's who within a research project, and there's a lot more implications than there used to be. So we just really have to think a little bit more deeper about that. So these are conversations we engage in, and even with students who are undergraduate, they are really engaging with these conversations and having passionate conversations around data ethics, which is what we really hope to happen and we love happening. Data visualization and representation. So this is kind of what it sounds like. It's using charts and infographics and visuals to represent your data in a way that's effective. So we're talking a little bit more than just using them or being able to use the tool. We're also talking about meaningful communication, just like when you're writing for the web or writing for a paper or um, any kind of communication you're using, you still want to use elements that make sense for one, your audience, for the message you're trying to get across, and for the medium that you're using. And so we talk about the elements of effective communication through visualization. You can see I have some of those shown here, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. We also talk about examples of poor visualizations like what we have here, where we have someone who created and actually put their name on, yes, they put their name on this chart of murders committed in Florida, and they actually reverse the chart with a zero at the top so that it looks like, for example, after the stand your ground law, that gun deaths decreased dramatically. However, it's just really misleading. We have examples like this that are a little bit more purposeful. And then we talk a lot about how um, it's not always purposeful. So that one was pretty obviously, kind of trying to fool the eye. However, in most cases, you're really just trying to create something in that has great information, that's meaningful to the person viewing it, and that's interesting. However, I really always love to use this phrase, which is if you torture data long enough, it will confess to anything. So you really have to be effective at paying attention. This kind of intermixes with the ethics idea again of paying attention to what you do so that you're letting the data speak for itself. So one of the examples that we give is we talk about, true zeros. So with the bar chart, we talk about kind of those standard basic rules that you should understand when making certain types of charts. With a bar chart, they should always start at zero. Charts that don't start at zero can often be misleading because it's the size of the bar that gives you the information. So something like this is a little bit more misleading. However, if you add in that true zero, you'll see the true effect or the true difference over time of whatever that data is you're trying to show. So we give rules like that to the students or to faculty or to pretty much anyone about representation and other problems that can come up when you are trying to represent your data through charts. We also talk about effective elements of representation. So for example, I have here pre-attentive attributes, things that draw the eye, things that make sense for what you're doing. And then we show examples of how you can work with that with the data that you have. So for example, this line chart here on the right, I didn't show what it looked like without the square or yeah, so it could be showing a trend over time. It could be showing a comparison of these lines. However, once you add that enclosure at the end, the viewer knows that you're trying to show them what happened at the very end, that they've all kind of come together. So depending on what your message is, you may want to add an enclosure that points out what area of the chart they should be looking at. You can add you can push things forward by using color or push things backwards by using gray. Once again, we go over those rules around using particular types of charts. So what is a line chart? When do you use a line chart? And what are the kind of best practices around it? How do you create the chart so that it's not misleading? So the idea of choosing a chart where the lines are about 2/3 the height of the chart. That's a little bit different than a bar chart, which always needs to start at 0. Line chart is not the same. So we talk about those things and why, so that people have an understanding of it. They may not necessarily memorize all of these things. However, they're a little bit more cognizant of it, and they can always look these things up later or refer back to slides or notes. Same thing as I mentioned with color, choosing color to point out different areas you want to focus the eye on, as well as when you use horizontal bar charts versus vertical or versus other types of charts, and how to use it for specific circumstances. This is one of the activities that I created for the class. So most of my examples are just real life examples that I've seen somewhere that I thought were either horrific or or just terrible. And so here's an example. I was reading an article published by UTA. So it's my own institution, guys. Published by UTA Communications, and this was a pie chart that was included in that. You can see here the title of it. So UTA advances toward Tier 1 status, graduates more than 200 PhDs, increases research expenditures, and blah, blah, blah. But then you get this pie chart. And so what I ask students is, what is this pie chart trying to say? And usually they have no idea, and I don't have any idea either. I can make up theories as to what the pie chart was supposed to say, or what are some effective better ways that they could have shown that information. And so I let them answer what else could we do? What could we do to make this better? What chart could we make that makes sense for the title of this article? So here are some changes they usually recommend because they're usually awesome. And some of those things are to point out the thing that you want to point out. So let's say you're interested in showing how the Department of Energy isn't one of our biggest funders for our research at UTA. That could be shown by highlighting that department and then pushing the other ones back using grays. Also, for a pie chart, one of the basic rules is to put them in order by size. I won't go into my nerdy details of like all the rules about sizes of pies because y'all don't need to judge me, but this is just an example of how you can improve the pie chart. Another example, this is all student created. They've all mentioned these to me, and I wholeheartedly agree with their examples. So here's another one. And this is to use a horizontal bar chart instead. Say you're interested in showing the makeup of the different funders and how much research funding is coming to the university. Well, that's a little bit easier to see using a horizontal bar chart with the bars in order. So as you can see, we've put the bars in order with the greatest one at the top. We've also coupled it with the percentages. If you go back to the slide, you can see the percentages were given with decimals. We took away the decimals because it's easier to kind of scan over and see the difference between like 26% versus 9%. And then it's also just much easier to determine the differences here. You lose the idea of makeup, so you can't see what makeup it is by the size of the pie chart, but I think with the percentages listed at the end, that's a little bit more effective. So these are kind of decisions that I let students make in improving just visualizations that I find places that I think are terrible. Also, adding descriptive text or even using color to show which is a major funder and which is a less major funder and so on. Other decisions that they've talked about after reading the article, obviously you all didn't get a chance to read the article, but as you can see, they're talking about research expenditures. Why not show research expenditures as your chart? If anything is increasing, that's obviously an awesome chart to show. Show the PhD graduates that are coming out of the university. They also talk about faculty awards. that we're developing all these patents and we're hiring star faculty, once again, be great to show a chart with that information. These students were journalism students, and so that's why I wanted to use this example, and they did great about coming up with alternatives here. So now that we've touched on a few of the competencies and hopefully have a good understanding of what they are and what the leveling means and so on, I wanted to show how we're using them in classes. So for the data literacy competencies, and I want to thank Christy here because she actually asked me a question that made me add this slide. And this was how we adapted the competencies to different examples. So if you're familiar with information literacy, or you're a liaison, or you just have some experience with any kind of teaching or creating like instruction, you may be familiar with this method where you begin with what they need to know. So in this case, you start with the competencies. I usually meet with a faculty member, or I get their syllabus from them and determine what they need to know. So a lot of these are in the competencies. If there's certain things that aren't being covered in the class, that would be what I consider what I need to teach. So they have a class assignment. They need to know these things that I've determined. And then I look at what the instructor is already teaching, and I basically exclude. I don't want to copy what they've already taught to the students, so I teach them then what's missing. That's my new curriculum. And then I determine how I'm going to teach it. I usually use things like, how big is the class? Do they have access to the computers? Is there a projector in the room? And so on. Are they familiar with the technology that we're going to be using, or is it the first time they're going to be using it? You ask yourself those questions to determine. Pedagogy is kind of a fancy word for just saying figuring out how you're going to teach it, using within the constraints that you have. So then once you're able to do that, once you're able to determine your lesson plan, then you create learning outcomes or assessment around this. In this case, we already have learning outcomes, so then you would just measure how you would have them accomplish this. So for example, the exercise I just showed with the pie chart, my assessment was their ability to bring up new visualization types based on what they learned, and they were absolutely able to do that. So according to what I set out from the beginning, they were able to then accomplish what I had as a learning objective. So here are some examples of learning goals that we created for classes. This was a digital humanities class. It was an English course, and after talking to the faculty member and reviewing the syllabus, they have an assignment at the end of the semester where they are writing about a musician or a short story author, and creating visualizations about that person. They do activities in the class where they have to collect data. So this professor studies Jay-Z lyrics, and they had to collect all of the like frequencies of terms being used by Jay-Z in his various albums. And so learning about their final assignment, as well as learning about um, what they're already doing in the class, I developed these learning goals, which are pretty much word for word from what was in the competencies. The only one that's new was the gaining proficiency in use of Google Fusion tables, because that was something that was identified by the professor. He wanted them to be able to learn how to use that tool. I've highlighted kind of the two main points was his understanding the use of data. So for him, he felt that many students in humanities were they get kind of overwhelmed by seeing a spreadsheet. They calculate, how many times he used the word her over and over in each album, but then what do they do with it? They don't really know that connecting part of what do I do with it now? So I had two activities. One was to understand the data. Understanding the data is a big thing for me. And so I have a picture here of an artist named Tiny Tempa, who's a artist in the UK. So I show them lyrics or I showed them slang terms. And I asked them what these terms mean. And people started getting arguments over what these terms meant. And the reason for that was all self-created. And they were actually terms that were both terms used in the UK and terms used in rap music, but they meant totally different things depending on how you heard them. And so once they were able to do that activity, then we looked at song lyrics and we heard this little kind of cut of the song, a popular song by Tiny Tempa, who is a UK rapper. And then they had to interpret what it meant, what is his background, any information you can come up with him in groups. So they did that activity in order to fully understand the idea of understanding your data. Understanding in the humanities, this might be understanding the author, it might be understanding the time period, and so on. Even if you're working with data in the humanities, you still need to maintain that idea and understanding of the humanities, even when you're doing numerical activities. So the second activity that we did was then we used Google Fusion tables. So I walked them through kind of the basics of Google Fusion tables. We loaded in the data that they'd created, and then we visualized two of the terms that were used in Jay-Z's music. And as you can see here, this is a chart that we created in class. And then I started asking questions about what this means. Well, the students got really involved because people love Beyonce and Jay-Z so much that they all know like what's going on in their life and everything. And they came up with this whole story of why he uses certain terms when. And so they really got very excited about the data at this point, and they knew how to interact with it. They knew how to understand it. They knew how to start developing stories around it. And that was kind of the overall aim for this activity. And so these like terms that I've added here, like when he met Beyonce and when he got married and so on, this was all from the students. They knew when the dates were and all of the stuff. So they added this here as interpretation of that. And they felt much more comfortable about being able to do that with their own data. And so that was one class where we had a couple visits and we did these two activities. Another class was a journalism class, which I mentioned before, and they needed to really, I felt, understand how to recognize bias and misleading reporting. So I showed that example of the pie chart was an example of one of the activities we did. I visited that class 4 times, and so here were the learning goals. I felt that the professor, once I read the syllabus, was accomplishing many of the data standards. And so here were the ones that I felt were kind of missing or things that we could reinforce. Also, evaluating the quality of where data comes from and understanding it was part of this. So we had multiple activities, including assessing data sources and visualizations, as well as discussing where they came from and how the interpretations can affect the outcome. I'll just walk quickly through these examples. So I showed them this table of Syrian conflict data, and I talked a lot about how this data is basically all based on just kind of not guesses, but estimations. So you can't be there to see how many people were killed, right? You're not there on the battlegrounds counting fallen people, but you are using, related data to kind of come up with these numbers. For example, how many were sent out, or how many approximately were a part of this group and who didn't come back, and so on. So we talked about, okay, what part of this is accurate? So I have A and I have B. What is a better way of notating this information? And so I let them kind of argue it out. And usually we always end up at A, where these are all estimations, and so it's better to be clear about that these are all estimations. Even though you've gotten to the point where you've counted 21,850 rebel fighters, it's still an estimation, and so it's really actually more accurate to report out over 21,000 or something like that, so that people know that it is an estimation. Because otherwise, it's just human nature to see a number and assume that that is the number rather than to assume that that is the estimation. We also look at another report. Once again, these are this was a story I happened upon. Somebody posted on Facebook, and I just thought, this is appalling. So I was like, I'm using it in a class. And so this was an article about hate-filled states. Texas was the highest, one of the highest ones. And actually, Arlington, Texas, they broke it down by city. Arlington, Texas was the highest on most of the categories they had. They had anti-black, anti-gay, anti-Hispanic, anti-women, pretty much according to this article, Arlington was against everybody. And I have two links here at the bottom because we visit that first link, the fusion story, as an example of kind of how things are reported. It was reporting this information. However, they're actually citing another story, which is at that second link. And that second link had even more information, including the research methods that they used on the study. And without visiting that second one, you actually had less understanding of the research that was done and how they came up with this information. Also interesting was that you start to notice that the states that were least derogatory are also the states that are less diverse. And so we started getting into this conversation about why Arlington, why cities in, like, for example, why are cities in California most anti-Hispanic? Okay, well, what are other theories that you could come up with? And they saw that, they're using Twitter to determine derogatory language against a particular group, and just the count, the overall count of the use of that language, that was what they used to determine what a state was against. The problem was the same states that were quote unquote against these groups were also higher ranking for using good terms for those groups. So it may just be that some of those states are just more diverse than others, and so they're having more conversations about those subgroups of our population than states that are not. And so we started talking about research methods and better ways of representing your data, questions you can ask yourself when before you put something like this out to make sure you're not for example, including in-group use or other things that could basically negate your findings. We did other projects as well, so just kind of building blocks, which is like how to work with spreadsheets, how to manage your data, like file naming, and then how to clean your data and restructure it. We also the students learn how to use Tableau. So they learn kind of best practices for creating charts, as well as, how to avoid bias in your charts, but also how to create them in Tableau, which is a tool that is used a lot. Last, I just want to give an example from a public health class. This is a full semester class that I teach. And so there are a lot of elements of the data competencies here. So I just kind of, instead of listing the learning goals, I listed the competencies that they relate to. This includes structuring and visualization. And so the students go through a number of activities, including IRB training, collecting and analyzing data, and so on. I have linked here, you can actually click that link, website example, that links to one of the students' websites. So over the semester, in groups of 2, the students create a website. And the goal of the website is for them to integrate sources of information that are varied. And so I have screenshots of the website, so you don't necessarily need to go there, but you can if you want to explore it further. But this website is one of the student websites, and it integrates information from research articles, as traditionally, so they learn how to search databases. It integrates information from web-based, evidence-based websites like CDC and so on. They need to know how to find trustworthy information on the web and then present it in a way that makes sense for a website. So here's another page within that website. And then they also integrate, they need to structure the information in a way that makes sense. So we use a lot of bulleting, images. We talk about citing and how to, effectively use things like that. And so we talk about the integration of different information as well as open data. So this is actually interactive charts that they created using Plotly. And so they had to learn how to use Plotly. They also had to learn how to work with open data, how to understand the structure of it. A lot of people see estimate, standard deviation, and so on, and they're really confused on what all those numbers mean. So we talked about what those numbers mean, how to restructure that information in order to chart it in Plotly, and so on. And so you end up with this website that is really comprehensive and created for basically the general public. This is a public health class, so it makes sense to create things that are, doing more good and a work product that they can show upon graduation. So this is an example of how they use data integrated with other information sources to create something a lot more multifunctional. We also have workshops, open workshops. These links are also live as well. So that link is our Data Analysis and Visualization series, or DAVIS for short, which includes workshops on data management, data visualization, different tools around working with data, and so on. And then we also have a new website that is brand new, so we're still getting it all worked out. If you see any like short sentences and things like that, it's because we're still populating it with content. But you can visit our Division of Scholarly Communication website there on the left. That link has information about our upcoming events and activities and everything going on with data services at UTA. Moving forward, we hope to have even more campus integration. We're looking at another full semester course, well, their version of a semester, which is 6 weeks, for the Masters of Science in Nursing Administration group. We also integrate a lot of data instruction in the community health nursing classes in person and online. A lot of our classes for many of our students are purely online, so we create digital learning objects for them, usually as LibGuides, videos, all kinds of things that we create for them. That's embedded in each of the classes every semester and in each section of that class. We're working in a partnership with the GIS certificate program, which offers a number of courses with GIS around research data services for those students, as well as data instruction for public policy, formation and analysis class. Also, I'll be co-presenting about the data competencies during ACRL's virtual conference with Gretchen. She's much better at answering instruction design questions, so she's a great person to ask. A lot of this will be kind of same content. However, as I mentioned, she's a lot better at answering those types of questions. Also, I had in here that I'll be teaching a 3-hour workshop at ACRL on data visualization called the Data Shop, but it actually filled up, so it's already full, but you can actually attend and get on the waiting list, and so attend if someone doesn't show up, but that's kind of up to you. We're also conducting some research on the competencies effectiveness. So as I mentioned, I've tried this for 2 semesters at UTA, and I'm working with folks at the University of Michigan they've implemented it there, and so we're interested in implementing it at other campuses as well. We're focused on health sciences, so if you're aware of health sciences librarians or health sciences libraries interested in integrating data instruction, um, we would be interested in hearing from them as a partner on this. We will be submitting probably a grant proposal in the fall, and we would love to implement this at your campus, so please let me know if you're interested in that. We're also creating a interdepartmental data portal on campus where OIT, libraries, the vice president for research's office, and so on, we're all partnering together to create this comprehensive website with information about working with data, understanding data, the services that exist on campus, and so on, the training that exists on campus, so that people kind of have a one-stop shop for going and finding out information. We're also hoping to create a space for data analysis and visualization in our library called the Data Cave, which we hope to develop over the summer. And we're also looking into potential data repositories. So it's also great that I get to hear about TDR, which I definitely recommend attending the next webinar to hear more about it. And so that is kind of the total.
All right. Thank you so much, Peace. That was wonderful and impressive. Um, it's been fun to hear. It's always fun to hear about all the great work that institutions in our consortium are doing, and this was especially fun. So we're going to have time to take questions. We have about 6 minutes left in our hour. So now is the time to be thinking about those questions and entering them into the chat window. As you're doing that, I want to remind you all about our final webinar in the series, which will be coming up on Thursday, March 9th at 11 a.m. Central. In this final webinar, Santee Thompson from the University of Houston and I will be trying to kind of bring it all together by connecting the data competencies that Peace has explored today with some of the core functionality of the Texas Data Repository. and we'll be exploring that repository both as a tool for teaching and instruction around research data management, but also as the infrastructure that underlies and kind of manifests the obligations to research data management that are represented in the competencies. So we hope you'll join us for that in a couple of weeks. And with that, I will stop talking and see what questions are out there from those listening. While people are gathering their thoughts, Peace, I wanted to ask, um, you clearly have a pretty broad and deep knowledge of a lot of these areas within research data creation, management, all along the research data management lifecycle. But I'm curious, especially as they relate to these disciplinary differences, what do you, how do you approach a question or a problem or a workshop request or whatever it is when it's in areas outside your own set of skills and knowledge? Um, do you, do you ever encounter that where you're like, oh, I don't know enough about that, or I don't know enough about this question as it relates to this particular discipline, and what do you do in terms of instruction when you are faced with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question because that's pretty much most of what I do. We've gotten a lot of business from the College of Business and from the College of Liberal Arts and all these disciplines I'm less familiar with. I'm much more diehard medical librarian, but it's been really fun thinking of activities for these for these students. It really goes back to that model that I showed, where you understand, what you need to teach, and trying to figure out how you're going to teach it in a way that's effective and interesting for people who will be there. So you saw with the data journalism students, we're using news stories and stories coming out of university communications and things that they will be encountering in their lives. So I try to make things as relative as possible, where it's still accomplishing those same goals, but it's just speaking in their language. Some of that I asked for help with. So we were doing a presentation on network analysis for history students, and I showed it to I showed it to the digital humanities library, and I would ask her, like, how do you say this in history? Like, how do history people say it? And she would like, no, we don't say it like this. We say it like this. And just like little things like that to help me be a little bit more effective with what I'm saying. But all of it is just kind of test and trial, and as long as I have, this is my kind of comfort zone, as long as I have a good understanding of what they're going to be doing in the activity. Are they going to be creating a map? Are they going to be creating um, charts and visualizations? Are they going to work with data and have to do some sort of analysis or statistics? Those things I can work with and then give them the foundation to be able to do that without having, really deep understanding of their discipline.
That's great, thank you. And we have a question from the University of Houston about whether you are willing to share lesson plans and other related materials.
Yeah, so I've actually been actively collecting a lot of my materials, and I hope to make them. Sorry, that's my dog. I hope to make them available very soon. I'm still working on a structure for sharing those out, but obviously I share anything through personal communication. But please look out for probably a large website or something where I have those materials available.
Great. Other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank you again, Peace, for this really wonderful presentation today, and to everybody out there listening for your attendance and participation. We will, as a reminder, we will be posting this recording and the slides as soon as possible, and we hope to see you again on March 9th for our third and final webinar. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.